By 1575, Emperor Akbar had already transformed the Mughal Empire. Rajput fortresses had fallen, Gujarat had been secured, and the empire stretched farther than ever before. But far to the east, a brutal, untamed enemy waited, not behind towering walls, not across scorching deserts, but beyond endless rivers, dense forests, and the vast, treacherous marshlands of Bengal. There, one man refused to bow before the Mughal Empire, Daud Khan Karrani, the last independent Afghan ruler of Bengal. For years, he had watched Akbar's empire grow stronger. Now, he stood between the Mughals and one of the richest regions in Asia. The coming battle would not simply decide Bengal's future. It would determine whether the Afghan dynasties could survive the relentless rise of the Mughal Empire. On March 3, 1575, near the village of Tukaroi, two powerful armies finally met. War elephants collided with elite cavalry. Heavy artillery shook the marshlands. Thousands clashed for the ultimate control of eastern India. And by sunset, the history of Bengal had changed forever. To truly understand the clash at Tukaroi, we must first understand the immense prize of Bengal. In the 16th century, this region was an absolute economic powerhouse. Its incredibly fertile delta produced legendary agricultural harvests. Its massive river networks moved wealth across the subcontinent, and its bustling ports connected global trade networks from Persia to Southeast Asia. To control Bengal was to control unimaginable wealth. But unlike Gujarat, Bengal remained defiant. It was firmly ruled by the Karrani dynasty, a powerful Afghan kingdom that rose from the ashes of the Sur Empire. Its new ruler, Sultan Daud Khan Karrani, was young, aggressive, and fiercely determined to preserve his sovereignty. He had watched closely as Akbar's shadow expanded eastward. He saw Malwa crushed. He saw Gujarat annexed. He saw the legendary Rajput fortresses shattered. He knew the Mughal war machine was now looking directly at his borders. But Daud Khan refused to bow. Instead, he mobilized his realm. He fortified strategic river crossings. He rallied battle-hardened Afghan chieftains. And he massively expanded his elite war elephant corps. Akbar, too, recognized the stakes. As long as an independent Afghan kingdom breathed in the east, the Mughal Empire's northern frontier would remain perpetually vulnerable. One of Asia's richest trading hubs would remain completely outside imperial authority. Neither ruler actively sought an immediate war, but both possessed a cold strategic truth. Sooner or later, only one empire could dictate the fate of Bengal. Akbar knew that launching a campaign into Bengal was a massive logistical gamble. Unlike the rocky terrain of Rajasthan or the open, arid plains of Gujarat, Bengal was a theater completely dominated by water. An endless maze of winding rivers sliced through the countryside. Dense, unexplored jungle choked marching lanes, and treacherous mudflats threatened to swallow heavy transport equipment whole. It was a nightmare landscape for any traditional invading force. Rather than taking the field himself, Akbar placed the fate of the empire in the hands of a seasoned veteran, Munim Khan, a senior imperial statesman, and one of the crown's most trusted supreme commanders. His directives were absolute: annihilate the Karrani resistance and bring the Bengal Delta under Mughal hegemony. But Daud Khan was prepared. He mobilized a devastating coalition: thousands of lethal Afghan light cavalry, a massive phalanx of armored war elephants, and veteran skirmishers who had spent decades mastering regional ambush tactics. The Sultan believed the terrain itself was his ultimate defensive weapon. To reach him, the Mughals would have to overextend their supply lines far from their imperial heartland, forcing them to cross hostile, unfamiliar waters. Deep within territory, the Afghans knew intimately. Yet, the imperial war machine pressed onward. Month after month, village after village watched the iconic Mughal standards crest the horizon, engaging in monumental engineering feats, throwing up temporary pontoon bridges, and establishing heavily guarded supply depots. Munim Khan's forces slowly bled deep into the Bengal interior. The maneuvering phase was over. Both hosts were now on an inescapable collision course toward a single obscure destination: a flat plain near the village of Tukaroi. Neither commander could delay the reckoning any longer. The decisive battle for eastern India was only days away. By early March 1575, the vanguard of the Mughal army finally spilled onto the open plains near Tukaroi. There, Daud Khan had chosen to make his ultimate stand. The selected battlefield was a tactical paradox. While the wide open center offered the flat terrain necessary for massive cavalry maneuvers, the surrounding web of rivers and deep marshes severely bottlenecked any escape routes, turning every tactical command into a high-stakes gamble. Munim Khan meticulously deployed the imperial host according to classic Mughal doctrine. Battle-hardened heavy cavalry formed the sweeping left and right flanks. Discipline-bound infantry dug into the center, and a formidable line of field artillery was unlimbered at the front, positioned to rip through the enemy formations before the lines could even clash. Directly across the plain, Daud Khan drew up the pride of the Afghan kingdom. His lethal, highly mobile light horsemen stood poised on the wings. Thousands of veteran Afghan clansmen stood locked in tight formation, and massed at the very front of his vanguard. A towering phalanx of armored war elephants stood waiting for the signal to launch. For centuries, these living siege engines had dictated the rules of engagement on the subcontinent. A synchronized elephant charge could effortlessly shatter tight infantry lines, panic and scatter elite cavalry horses, and throw an entire army's command structure into absolute chaos. Daud Khan staked everything on the belief that this brutal shock cavalry would smash the Mughal lines to pieces. The imperial commanders knew exactly what was coming. If that massive wall of muscle and iron broke through their front lines, months of exhausting campaign logistics and Akbar's grand vision of a unified Eastern Empire would collapse into dust in a single afternoon. As dawn broke over the horizon of Tukaroi, deep war drums echoed across the flat plains. Brilliant battle standards unfurled into the morning sky. Both hosts understood a grim reality. There would be no tactical retreat. The bloody struggle for the soul of Bengal was about to begin. With the first rays of dawn, the fragile silence of the plains was shattered. Deep war drums thundered across the valley. Brass trumpets echoed through the morning mist. Then, the entire Afghan battle line surged forward. Sultan Daud Khan unleashed his ultimate tactical trump card, the Vanguard Elephant Corps. Massive iron-plated beasts barreled across the open ground, their drivers driving them ruthlessly toward the imperial lines. Directly behind them, the Afghan light cavalry charged with deafening war cries. The earth literally trembled beneath the kinetic weight of thousands of pounding hooves. Munim Khan maintained absolute composure under the impending shock assault. He waited for the optimal engagement distance, then ordered the Mughal artillery line to open fire. The imperial batteries roared in unison. A thick blanket of sulfurous smoke blinded the plain. Heavy iron shot tore through the dense advancing enemy formations, but the momentum of the Afghan charge refused to break. Braving the devastating wall of fire, the surviving war elephants plowed directly into the Mughal center with catastrophic force. For an agonizing window, the fate of eastern India hung in the balance. Flank cavalry clashed with flank cavalry in brutal melee. Regiments of archers darkened the sky with volleys of arrows. Sabers flashed blindly through suffocating clouds of dust and gunpowder. Neither side was willing to yield an inch of ground. The Afghans fought with the desperate ferocity of men defending their last sovereign kingdom. The Mughals fought with the rigid execution of an empire that refused to be stopped. Hour after hour, the meat grinder continued. Then, the strategic momentum began to shift. The highly disciplined, deeply layered Mughal formations slowly absorbed the initial shock of the elephant assault. The imperial artillery line re-established its rhythm, pounding the enemy rear. On the wings, the Mughal heavy cavalry began to inexorably envelop the Afghan flanks. What had begun as an explosive, high-risk Afghan shock offensive was gradually grinding down into a brutal war of attrition, and in a battle of pure endurance, the imperial machine held the ultimate advantage. As the relentless engagement ground on, the kinetic energy of the Afghan shock assault finally stalled. The continuous, systematic pounding of the Mughal artillery line, relentless heavy cavalry countercharges on the wings, and the unyielding discipline of the imperial infantry were systematically bleeding Daud Khan's forces dry. The formidable war elephants that had smashed through the vanguard at dawn were now thoroughly exhausted and heavily wounded. Blinded by smoke and maddened by pain, several of the massive beasts turned back in sheer panic, plowing directly into the dense Afghan ranks behind them and crushing their own infantry. Recognizing this critical structural fracture, Munim Khan seized his moment. He ordered a massive coordinated general advance across the entire front. The fresh reserves of the Mughal heavy cavalry surged forward, hammering both of the enemy's overextended flanks simultaneously. Under this crushing pincers movement, the Afghan line began to buckle. Then, it completely shattered. A brutal, disorganized melee erupted across the plain as the remaining Afghan units were isolated and surrounded. Daud Khan's royal guard fought with suicidal bravery to buy time. But the sweeping tactical pressure was impossible to contain. One defensive pocket after another was utterly overrun by the advancing imperial columns. Watching his grand ambition dissolve into chaos on the bloody fields of Tukaroi, Sultan Daud Khan made the bitterest strategic choice of his life. He ordered a full breakout retreat, shielded by a desperate rearguard action of his loyal chieftains. The young sultan managed to slip away from the slaughter, preserving his life and his core command staff, but completely abandoning the field of Tukaroi. As evening shadows stretched across the blood-soaked plain, the iconic banners of the Mughal Empire stood victorious over the valley. The grueling high-stakes battle had been won. But surprisingly, this decisive victory did not mean the end of the campaign. The bloody war for the ultimate mastery of Bengal was far from over. The tactical victory at Tukaroi was an absolute masterpiece for the imperial forces. But it did not completely pacify the eastern frontier. Although Munim Khan had decisively won the battlefield, his primary strategic objective, Sultan Daud Khan Karrani, had slipped through his fingers. The deposed Afghan ruler had successfully retreated south into the rugged terrain of Odisha, rallying the highly loyal, battle-tested remnants of his shattered army. Exhausted by months of brutal jungle warfare and bleeding logistics, neither side possessed the stomach for another costly, drawn-out campaign. Recognizing the stalemate, both high commands agreed to lay down arms. The diplomatic result was the historic Treaty of Cuttack. Under its sweeping terms, Daud Khan formally signed away his sovereign rights to the massive wealth of Bengal and Bihar, ceding them directly to the Mughal Empire. In return for this massive territorial concession, Akbar permitted the young sultan to retain his crown over Odisha, reframed now as a subservient Mughal vassal state. On paper, it was a staggering geopolitical triumph for the crown. At a single stroke, nearly the entirety of the vast Bengal Delta acknowledged the ultimate supremacy of the Mughal throne. Akbar had effectively annexed one of the grandest economic prizes in all of Asia, without having to expend another drop of imperial blood in a follow-up siege. The legendary fertile deltas, the global trading hubs, and the unfathomable tax revenues of Bengal were now officially under the shadow of the Mughal crest. But beneath the surface, this imperial peace was dangerously fragile. Sultan Daud Khan had not signed the treaty because he had accepted defeat. He had signed it purely to buy time for his wounded realm. He remained a young, deeply ambitious sovereign who had no intention of dying a subservient vassal to a foreign emperor. He was simply waiting for the exact moment the imperial garrison lowered its guard. And he would not have to wait long. Within a single year, the peace would shatter, and the banners of rebellion would unfurl once more. The bloody final chapter for the ultimate mastery of Bengal was still waiting to be written. The Battle of Tukaroi was far more than just another tactical victory for the imperial crown. It marked the true beginning of the end for centuries of sovereign Afghan rule in eastern India. Although Sultan Daud Khan would gather his banners for one final, desperate uprising, his definitive defeat came just 12 months later amidst the mud and blood of the Battle of Rajmahal. With his fall, the Karrani dynasty vanished from the pages of history forever. Bengal, one of the most coveted, wealthy, and strategically vital regions in all of Asia, was definitively integrated as a permanent jewel of the Mughal Empire. For generations to come, its vast river networks drove imperial trade. Its bustling global ports anchored wealth from distant continents. And its staggering tax revenues financed the golden age of the Mughal dynasty. But perhaps the grandest strategic lesson of Tukaroi is that lasting empires are never built by single victories alone. They are forged through relentless, unyielding persistence. Immediately after conquering Gujarat, Akbar refused to rest on his laurels. The moment one frontier was stabilized, he instantly mobilized to pierce another. Step by step, campaign by grueling campaign, he systematically transformed a fragile regional state into the supreme, undisputed superpower of the Indian subcontinent, and the conquest of Bengal was the definitive proof of that transformation. What do you think was the ultimate tactical turning point on the plains of Tukaroi? Was it the unyielding discipline of the Mughal infantry, the devastating opening salvos of Munim Khan's artillery line, or Daud Khan's controversial decision to sound the retreat? Let us know your tactical analysis in the comments below. And if you want to uncover the secrets of legendary medieval campaigns, hit that subscribe button to join us here at Crescent Steel. Because in our next episode, the peace shatters and the Mughal war machine is forced to march back into the treacherous marshlands to finish what they started.
Like and subscribe Crescent Steel.